Welcome back for another episode of Storytelling That Sells, a podcast that's really designed to help professionals. And if you're here from a personal perspective, you're welcome. But it's for professionals, whether you are working in a large corporation, whether you are an entrepreneur running a business, your narrative and the narratives that you see around you are so important to engaging with your sales prospects, your clients, people that you need to influence if you are in a corporation with your employees. And one of the most important ways that we can use narratives is when we are speaking live in front of a group of people, whether it's an employee town hall, or if, like today, it's somebody like Peggy Nolan, who uses conferences to generate sales leads, to reconnect with clients that may have worked with her as a consultant in the past or who may need her for the future. And so when Peggy's out on the speaking circuit, Peggy has learned how to use a narrative form of speaking and presentation skills to engage her clients in a different way. And while I've never seen Peggy speak live, what I've known and learned from her over the last couple of weeks, getting to know her better, is that she understands the concepts of compelling narratives. And I am very interested in letting her tell us how she's come to these ideas, how she's been using them, and how perhaps we all should be following Peggy in her footsteps. So Peggy Nolan, thank you for giving me your time today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Rich. I'm pretty excited about our conversation today.
I am too. And the couple of times that we've spoken, I'm just so overjoyed to learn so much about you and learn new things about you. What you need to know is that Peggy is CEO and founder of her own business. So she consults with companies in the payment card world. So when you use your credit card at a merchant, whether it's Macy's or a small coffee shop, although Peggy doesn't necessarily work with the small coffee shops, and with the whole network of industry that's behind the way that a card is used at the point of purchase. And all of that data now has to be encrypted, sent to a bunch of servers over the internet where it can be hacked, and now relayed to different entities to approve that transaction, to make sure that the card member is approved to use that card. All of that stuff that goes on the IT side of the fence, that's what Peggy's company, Payment Card Assessments, does for a living. She makes sure that all of that work, that is all the compliance behind that, is being obeyed. And
oh God, I hate that word.
I'm sorry. Let's use a better word. But
that your security controls are properly, they're working properly, they're effective, and they're efficient.
There you go. You know what? That's the old Catholic upbringing, Peggy. You know, I was always raised by the priests and the nuns to obey.
Obey, yeah.
But basically what Peggy's company does is it helps this whole network of merchants, card issuers, the card processing networks, the brands like American Express that do a lot of that, but also are promoting the security of card acceptance. She helps all of these entities save time and money and energy, and yes, make sure that they're in compliance with the standards that the industry has agreed to. But here's some other interesting things about Peggy. Peggy also teaches yoga and meditation. And I think a lot of her work in that space has led her down to this ability to be a great storyteller. Because one of the things that I always teach is that great storytellers have learned how to slow down the universe, approach opportunities like understanding how somebody receives a communication. And because of that awareness, you're able to do things in a more powerful, compelling way. And we're going to explore that a little bit with Peggy. So Peggy, tell us a little bit more about where your company is today, the kind of work that you do, and tell me a little bit about, why do you speak? Where do you go normally, typically? And what are those opportunities like for you as a business owner?
Well, let me tell you a little bit first about Payment Card Assessments.
Yes.
So Payment Card Assessments was actually like a little flicker of an idea back in 2017, 2018, when I realized after speaking at several local events through ISACA and speaking at the PCI North American Community Meeting, I realized that there was something missing. And I had people tell me that I was the piece that was missing. So the data security standards that merchants need to comply with, it tells you the what, but there's not a lot of guidance or direction on how to do this. But my business partner and I, who we'd worked with for 10 years at a level 1 merchant.
And a level 1 merchant is someone who has to like achieve the highest level.
The highest level of compliance. It's a mandatory, it's mandatory. It's a report on compliance. It's not a self-assessment. And you have to have a third party come in and do your assessing. So we did this for 10 years together. But after speaking, I realized that the pieces that we were putting in place, the how to do this, that needed to be brought to the community at large. So when we both left, she took early retirement and I left about 6 weeks after she left. We had, for 3 years, we said we were going to do this together. So that's what we did. We left and we started our own company last year. We went live with our website, but it took us some time to rebuild the automation tool that we always dreamed of having. So it was not just taking what we built at our former company. We built it in a wonky tool. It didn't do everything that we needed to do, but it was what we were given.
Right.
But this time we had the ability to kind of, do our own assessment and our own research. What tool was going to best help us help merchants? Right. So we built our automated program management assistant in a project manager workflow tool called ClickUp. And it works fantastically. I love it. So
now you bring that software and your experience, the two of you, into a company, and you offer to them the ability to make sure that they're in compliance, so they don't get dinged.
If you have to do a mandatory report on compliance, it's your QSA that comes in, the qualified security assessor that comes in and assesses you against hundreds of security requirements.
Right.
And it's an all or nothing proposition. They all have to be in place. You can't miss one. It's not like a college exam where you can get 10 wrong and still get a passing. You can still get an A, right? You get 10 wrong on your
no curve on this test.
There's no curve. You don't pass. So
and then you run the risk as a merchant.
Yes.
Of not being able to process credit card payments.
Well, I think that's level 1 merchants make acquiring banks a lot of money, I think.
Right.
So there's ways, right? There's not a lot of teeth in the or else yet.
Right.
But there's so much inconsistency across the merchant landscape. And Verizon puts out an annual payment security report, and it's really easy to see how merchants are just all over the place.
Yes.
In their compliance. And the last one that was released, the last payment security report, showed only a 28% successful compliance rate. So that means like 72% of the merchants are just falling down after they turn in their attestation of compliance. They're out of compliance. I always joke, you're out of compliance in about 2.3 seconds.
And so the risk is that credit cards can be swiped. Risk is that
getting hacked, getting breached.
Yeah. And so you as a consumer, you as a business owner, of course, it's our brand is at risk. Obviously, financial penalties. If tort lawyers come after a company because they understand that the company wasn't complying with certain standards, they might be able to get a jury to rule against them in a civil case. So there's quite a bit of risk out there. And as a result, there are tons of people in corporations who are interested in hiring somebody like Peggy to ensure that they don't end up on the wrong side of a breach. Yeah. So Peggy, when you, we'll talk a little bit about how you got here, but when you do go out and speak publicly, who typically is that in that audience? Is it a bunch of wonky IT people? Is it VPs of marketing? Is it people who are in like at Bank of America, trying to understand what's going on in the credit card industry? Is it a wide array of people, or do you have a narrow channel that you're speaking in front of?
So when I speak, so I could have kind of a broad spectrum depending on what organization I'm speaking at.
Mhm.
Like if it's with ISACA, it's generally other auditors, other assessors, other people who are in charge of other compliance programs like GDPR or HIPAA or whatever,
Right.
and not just PCI, but other conferences that I speak at. Like when I go to the PCI North American Community Meeting, I'm speaking.
That's your tribe.
That's my tribe. Those are my people. I'm speaking to other QSAs. I'm speaking to internal security assessors. So
Right.
ISAs. I'm speaking to PCIPs, which is the P stands for professional. I'm speaking to the PCI Security Council, and
Right.
the card brands are represented there. So and other vendors are there too. So I'm speaking to a broad segment of the payment card security landscape.
And that creates quite a bit of challenges. If you're given the responsibility, some conference knows of you, they really have liked seeing you speak somewhere else, they invite you to come speak at their conference. Your audiences could be widely different. How are you using stories? And we'll talk a little bit about why later. How are you using storytelling and narrative to address the fact that audiences are different from conference to conference? The material may need a little bit more, a little bit less technical approach and a little bit more of the let me help explain this to you and get you to want to take action. How do you use narratives in that respect?
So it's interesting because when I'm up speaking, there's nothing technical about what I'm talking about. It's literally, how do you influence people? How do you communicate to the right people? And how do you herd the cats, right? Everybody laughs when I say, hey, you're herding cats again today, aren't you? Because there's anywhere from, you can have 10 people involved in PCI compliance at your company, or you can have upwards of 80. It just depends. And I always called it, I got to herd the cats again this year. I got to find out who my control owners are, because it's always, the shifting sands of who owns what, when, where, and how.
Right.
So I literally address things that are very non-technical. I'll be honest with you. I've been to many presentations where they start getting into technical speak, and I'm like, okay, you lost me. You have completely lost me.
Right.
I don't care anymore.
What was the moment where you realized, and maybe this happened before you became the founder of your company, when was the moment where you realized there's a way for me to present this content in a different way than a lot of my peers are doing, and that will draw attention to me and accomplish the goals of my presentation? Was there like an epiphany moment, or was it something over time where you were sitting in a bunch of conferences saying, wow, that style isn't working for me?
Nope. It was actually a light bulb moment. I was sitting at a conference back in 2012, and it was a broad compliance related conference, and there was a 1-hour presentation on PCI, and I said, this is the most boring thing
From someone who loves this stuff.
Well, I didn't really love it in 2012.
Okay.
I didn't love it until I loved it.
But you understood it.
That was the role I was hired into. I was hired to run the PCI compliance program. I wasn't completely in love with it, but I went to this conference, and this gentleman was up on stage. I gave him, I tried paying attention, but he was as boring as watching paint dry. And the thing is that this subject matter is probably as boring as watching paint dry.
It can be. Yeah.
So I realized that what I had to do was be able to present it in a way that my audience could relate to it and laugh about it.
Using humor is always a good
Using
ploy.
humor.
Yep.
So the first time I spoke to a huge audience was in 2016. I just was determined I was going to get up on stage, because if somebody who was boring could do it, I could do it, and I could tell a story.
Right. And so what was that like? Was it, when you say tell a story, were you telling a story like a hypothetical company that had compliance issues and you solved them? Or what was that narrative?
It was personal experience. Yeah. Personal experience. Being dropped into the PCI combat zone because somebody just discovered that there was servers with credit card data on it and CVV data on it after somebody had signed an attestation of compliance saying that there was no credit card data on the network. That's where I got dropped in.
Right.
And it wasn't pretty. It was kind of ugly. And it was about getting that business unit. First, we had to do a self-assessment, which more of a gap assessment,
right.
But we had to go through the self-assessment process to do that gap. And telling a director who is like 3 or 4 pay grades above me, I'm sorry, you're not compliant. And I was just like struggling with, how do I tell this person that no,
we've got a problem, Houston.
We've got a problem. And then there I was. So after the self-assessment was done, the acquiring bank said, oh no, you have to do a report on compliance because we know that somebody lied on the self-assessment. Right. And so I literally, I'll never forget this. We got the report on compliance done because we had done the gap assessment and we had fixed a bunch of the problems, purged the data, blah, 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 got it all done, got the report on compliance in. It was December 21st. I said, I'm going on vacation. I'll see you next year. I went home and I spent 3 days on the couch in my bathrobe watching reruns of Doctor Who. And I literally contemplated never going back. I said, oh God, there's just no way. There is.
And you're telling this whole story on the stage at this conference.
And everybody's nodding their heads. They get it. They've been there.
And that is the key. For anybody who's listening, the key is, when I talk about storytelling, really what I'm saying to anybody who is working with me or trying to learn from me is that you're trying to create a very specific connection with someone who can share your experience. There's a common ground for the two of you to stand on. And once that sales prospect, that audience member feels like the two of you are standing side by side, they will keep their attention longer. They will have an emotional reaction that's more connected. And like Peggy said, you start to see the nodding heads. I have seen that when I have spoke. I have literally told stories with the specific purpose to get the audience to nod their heads. And now I know they're bought in. What was it like when you finished that particular speech? Was there like, people coming up to you to shake your hand and say, oh my God, yes, I know what you're talking about?
So there were people that came up to me after that one, hey, why is it this way? Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But it wasn't really until I went for my second PCI North American community meeting in 2018. And I delivered probably the funniest presentation that I've ever done in the realm of PCI, because it was about the people you're going to meet along the way.
Right.
But before I even started, I wanted to know who the QSAs were in the audience, who the ISAs were in the audience. And
so you did the put your hand up thing?
Yep, I did the put your hand up thing. And when I realized that, most of the people were ISAs, I was an ISA at the time. I said, so how many of you are new ISAs? Half the hands were still raised. And I said, run. You have
run.
Time. Run. You have time.
And that must have gotten a ton of chuckles.
I had everybody right here where I needed them.
Yep.
Yeah.
I just, and the fascinating thing is here we are, we're talking to a woman who has worked not only in Fortune 100 companies, but Peggy has, how many years did you spend in the Air Force?
Only 6.
Only 6. Okay. That's still a decent amount of time.
I did 1 enlistment.
Okay. And do you know where, Peggy, going back in history, where do you think your penchant for humor, for sort of understanding, having this level of self-awareness that if I can connect with people, I can communicate in a way where they're going to retain it. And the best way to do that is through storytelling. Where in your history, if we can go back, was it 20, 30 years that you started to realize you had this intuitively? Or is it something, I know that you do have your bachelor's degree in American history and you are a bit of a computer geek. That's where your master's is. Where did this realization come from?
So I've always had kind of like a side gig besides my day job. Although I don't have a side gig right now because Payment Card Assessments is it. It's everything. But I've always had a distraction. I've always had that side gig because a regular job doesn't fill everything that I needed in me.
Right.
I sold Arbonne and I went to a conference, and Rita Davenport at the time was the president of Arbonne, and Rita Davenport was like best friends with Dolly Parton, but she also had a very illustrious career in media, television, stuff like that. And every time I heard Rita speak, her messages were so important and they were hysterical. They were so funny. And I said, and she would tell you right off the bat, if you can get your audience laughing, they'll remember what you said.
Yes.
I've heard Jack Canfield speak. I've heard so many important people speak. I kind of learned from them. I learned from them. I learned from watching them in person. And I'm like, you know what? If I have half the presence of Rita Davenport, I'll be fine.
Yeah. One of the things that I like to do before I present at a conference is, as people are filing in, I'm keeping an eye on the clock, is I have this little sort of shtick, this warm-up shtick that I do, where I'm a little bit self-deprecating. I talk about the fact that I'm one of 10 children, and the approach is get 2 or 3 jokes out of that, get 2 or 3 loud guffaws, and now I got them warmed up.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of time to get them warmed up, so I have to hit pretty hard and fast because normally my speaking slot is 20 minutes.
Right. So you and I have talked in advance, so I'm asking you a leading question. Do you believe that another sort of side gig in your life, a hobby and interest of meditation and yoga, do you think that's helped you both as a speaker and as a storyteller in these speeches?
Absolutely. I kind of joke that the presentation that I gave in 2018 about the people you're going to meet along your PCI journey and who you have to deal with and how you're going to deal with them, they didn't realize that what I was teaching them was yoga. At the time, I was teaching them some very basic principles described. It wasn't yoga. It was some Taoist philosophy, which ties in with some yoga, but it was just, how do you deal with people? How are you going to deal with the owls who think they know everything, or the Eeyores who can't do anything and that'll never work? Or your rabbits. I love rabbits because they're always busy and they don't have time for you and they produce almost nothing. So how do you work?
I love it. I love your metaphors.
How do you work with these people? How do you work with them?
And that's the key, is that you're creating all of these relatable images. And one of the things that I have learned both by accident and on purpose is when I see presentations loaded up with bullet points and words, especially bullet points that are 2 lines, I immediately know that that person has never really experienced a self-awareness moment, because what would have done so much better for them would have been, like you said, either you're giving verbal images, or if you are going to use some kind of slide, Keynote or PowerPoint, just a rabbit. Just have a rabbit up there, because now the epiphany for the consumer of your knowledge is rabbits are timid. Rabbits, like you said, can always be busy. And now the words that Peggy spoke while I saw the image, I'm going to retain that a lot longer than there are these three types of people: the people who think nothing's ever going to come from this. The other, if you do that,
No.
I'm sorry, you're losing the audience. Didn't you tell me that you've actually used meditation and mindfulness in a presentation?
So real quick, 30 seconds, take a deep breath.
Right.
Breathe.
Right.
Fill up your belly.
Right.
Let that breath go all the way up to the space between your eyes, and then slowly, slowly, slowly exhale it out.
Right.
Empty your belly. Rinse and repeat as often as you need to.
And don't we all need that reminder?
Mm-hmm. And all really, as soon as you take in that deep breath and you bring that breath all the way up to this space right here, and you pause for a second, and then you just let it drift down your spine, and you feel your shoulders relax, you feel your face relax, your breath, you just feel the tension release.
Yes. I have been practicing mindfulness and meditation since 2005. I was going through a very stressful place in my life at the time, and I needed some kind of tool to literally do what Peggy just showed everybody, is this whole concept of if you're in a moment and you're bringing the stress in from all of your, catatonic thoughts and impulses and triggers, you're just in this space, you really can, just by breathing and focusing on your breath, push that out of your mind temporarily. And the more that you practice how to do that, the easier it becomes. We call it in meditation, we call it the monkey mind. The mind has always got chatter going on. And I have never used meditation in a speech, but oddly enough, I had a Catholic priest who I greatly admired. I think he was one of the best homilists I've ever known. He recently passed away, and I credit him as being a person who actually restored my faith in spirituality. He actually used to do that during some of his homilies, and I know a lot of the audience would be like, "What the heck is this guy doing?" But for me, sitting there in the pew and breathing deeply like he asked me to, I've never asked him before he passed away, "Where did you get that from?" I knew I got it from my Buddhist practice and my meditation practice, but here's this, Catholic priest.
Not to interrupt.
Go, please interrupt.
There's this amazing book. It's called Breath. It's on my bookshelf, and I can't think of the author right now, but he talks about all of the different types of prayers. Whether it's in Catholicism, the rosary,
right,
the malas, the 108 beads on your mala.
Right.
There's a reason why there's a beat to the prayers, like Hail Mary, full of grace. There's a breathing pattern to those words. And what it comes down to is it's like a 5 to 6 second inhale and a 5 to 6 second exhale. And that is what releases tension.
And I hope what everybody's picking up on is, here's Peggy coming into a speaking opportunity. The people who are in that audience have come to learn something to reduce the risk at their company, to ensure that the company is compliant. There are all these other people who are judging their performance. And of course, depending upon the senior leadership at that company, failure to comply could mean something about your employment. So there's this stressful thing that they do on a day-to-day basis, which is why newbies might want to run when they finally learn just how difficult the job it can be.
Yeah.
And here's Peggy bringing in a couple of tools. First of all, she's bringing in the de-stressing physical nature of breathing and mindfulness. She's bringing in humor, which we all know that it takes fewer muscles to smile than it does to frown, that smiling at someone will actually have a medical reaction inside them. And she's also bringing in stories so that people can relate to the subject matter instead of thinking this vortex of gloom and doom like Eeyore, that, oh my God, this will never work. And there's nothing but failure and catastrophe lying ahead. Here's Peggy telling a story about how things in a rhythmic fashion, a storytelling fashion, how you can solve your problems. And come join me on this peaceful speech as I help you come down off the ledge.
Or funny, I hope. Funny.
Or funny speech,
funny.
yes.
Funny.
Peaceful and funny.
Peaceful and funny. And
so, Peggy, as we start to wrap up, if you were to come up with one or two key things that you think people should be employing in their presentations, whether it's how they formulate the presentation at the beginning, whether it's the actual delivery, what do you think are 2 or 3 keys to your success that just about anybody could adopt if they put their mind to it?
So I think part of the keys to my success is a long time ago, like 15 years ago, I learned some basic copywriting skills, how to write a compelling headline, because that headline is what's going to have the person read the next sentence. And that next sentence is what's going to have the person read the next sentence.
Right.
And so the thing is that when you start your presentation, you want something that's very similar. You want that compelling hook. Whether it's you start off with just asking questions, because I think asking questions is the immediate connection with you and your audience.
Yep.
So I always like to ask 1 or 2, like, who are my peeps? Where are they? Where are you? Raise your hand.
Right.
Whether it's kind of an ad lib, because when I figured out that there was a lot of new ISAs in my audience, it just get out now. It just kind of like slipped out.
But that's good because that's authentic.
It was very authentic. And I was like, I kind of like saw the towering inferno in front of them for them.
And I would imagine even for the people who've been in the industry, when any of us have been working in an industry for a long time, I hear this a lot from restaurant owners. I hear this from people who work in retail who stick around. There's sort of this, commiseration that I'm still doing this despite the fact that this is an arduous vocation. And even for those people who weren't newbies, I bet you there was a tremendous amount of connection with that, with your authenticity.
Yeah, there is. And that is what prompted, after I got off the stage, I got swarmed that time. And I actually had somebody come up, hand me his business card and said, "Would you come to England and speak?" And I said, "Sure, sign me up. I'll go to England, whatever."
And think about it. The reason why is because you reached them at a different level.
Yeah.
And I have found that amazingly true in all the conferences I've been to. When I find somebody who is just doing their standard speech, anybody could hire them. But when I find somebody with a really unique approach, I do want to hand them my business card. I do want to hear from them. And again, because they're different and they're approaching things from an unconventional way. Peggy, where can we continue to follow your story? With your website? I know I've been starting to follow you on Instagram now. Where can we continue to understand your philosophy toward work, towards just how we should approach, speaking and living and storytelling?
Well, you can find me at paymentcardassessments.com. That's our website. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. Peggy, I think I'm Peggy Nolan.
I think you are.
I think I am. And you can, we also have our own business page for Payment Card Assessments on LinkedIn. However, on LinkedIn, part of my sarcasm just comes through with what I write. I have this little tongue in cheek about how I approach PCI DSS compliance, take it with a grain of salt. I roll my eyes a lot. I do little, the poop emojis.
Yes, I've seen your poop emojis.
Or
but that's your brand. That's who you are.
It's who I am, because
Yeah.
More than anything, I want to help merchants get a grip
Right.
on their compliance chaos.
Yeah.
There is an easier, better way to do it.
Right.
And that's what I teach merchants how to do.
And as far as I can tell, you do it extremely well.
Well, thank you, Rich. I appreciate that.
So, Peggy, thank you so much for explaining how you approach things. This has been so illuminating. I am fascinated by your grasp of history because I was a history minor.
Yeah.
And I know that people who love history understand that we are living a contextual narrative in this globe that we live on. So I'm thinking at some point, I definitely need to bring you back for a broader talk about, contextually,
Sure.
how do you live your life this way, understanding, where you reside at this moment. Thank you so much for the time that you've given to me today. And I know you and I share an interest in meditation and mindfulness. And one of the key things that I always tell people is the only commodity, and my father is the person who taught me this. The only commodity that you cannot create, you can create more love, you can create more money, you can create more great content on social media, though he passed before social media was anything. But what he always said to me was the most precious commodity in life is time. And Peggy has given me 60 minutes of her time that she can never get back. And I truly honor you for doing that.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you. It was my pleasure. My pleasure.
Let's stay in touch. I want to continue to hear your story.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Peggy.